The boss, suspecting the waitress had stolen, ordered her to undress in front of everyone. The entire restaurant was shocked by what they saw. Edward woke up startled, his heart pounding fiercely against his chest. He was drenched in cold sweat, and the sheets were twisted around his trembling legs. He sat up in bed, trying to calm his breathing as the images of his nightmare slowly faded from his mind. It had been the same nightmare, over and over again. The screeching sound of brakes, the crunch of metal against metal, the heart-wrenching screams. Every night, he relived the accident, a relentless reminder of his past. He tried to clear his mind, but the shadows of the memory lingered. Edward got up heavily, walking towards the bathroom in his small, cluttered apartment. He turned on the light and looked at himself in the mirror. Red-rimmed eyes and deep circles under them were evidence of his sleepless nights. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair and sighed, feeling the weight of guilt on his shoulders. Edward's apartment reflected his mental state. It was a dark and messy place, with empty bottles and beer cans piled in the corners. Clothes were scattered on the floor, and dirty dishes filled the sink. There were barely any furnishings, just an unmade bed, a wobbly table, and a broken chair. The walls, peeling and dirty, were covered with old posters and torn photos of a life that was once luxurious and carefree. 15 years ago, a young and reckless Edward, under the influence of alcohol, decided to take a group of girls to a lake after a night of partying. On their way back, he tried to overtake an old Chevy truck and ended up causing a tragic accident. The truck lost control and crashed into a tree, bursting into flames. Paralyzed by fear, Edward fled the scene, but the guilt had haunted him ever since. Since that fateful day, his carefree life of luxury, made possible by his family's wealth, had fallen apart. His father, Arthur, the successful CEO of a large corporation, had fostered a sense of entitlement and irresponsibility in his children. After the accident, Edward tried to escape his guilt by diving even deeper into substance abuse and a dissipated lifestyle. He splashed cold water on his face, trying to shake off the drowsiness. He looked around his messy apartment with empty bottles and clothes strewn everywhere. He had hit rock bottom, and although he knew it, he couldn't find the strength to change. His family's calls had ceased to be a source of support, and now he only felt shame and rejection. Edward decided to go for a walk to clear his mind. The cool morning air hit his face, and for a moment, he felt a glimmer of relief. He wandered through the deserted streets of the city, his thoughts swinging between despair and a faint hope for redemption. He passed by the local pizzeria, Pizzeria George, and noticed the lights on inside. He remembered seeing a "Help Wanted" sign in the window a few days earlier. With nothing to lose, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell of freshly baked dough and tomato sauce enveloped him, giving him a sense of home he hadn't felt in years. Behind the counter, an older man, George, looked up and smiled at him. "Can I help you with something, young man?" George asked kindly. Edward, not quite sure what to say, simply nodded. "I saw the sign in the window. Do you still need help?" George studied him carefully, as if he could see beyond his disheveled appearance and tired eyes. He nodded slowly. "Yes, we still need help. Do you have any experience in the kitchen?" Edward shook his head, feeling a lump in his throat. "No, but I can learn. I need this job." George looked at him with understanding. "All right, everyone deserves a second chance. You can start tomorrow morning. We work hard here, but we also support each other. Welcome to Pizzeria George." Edward felt a spark of hope ignite within him. Maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to redeem himself. and find a new path. He left the pizzeria with a slight smile on his lips, determined to face the new day with renewed resolve. He returned to his apartment and, for the first time in a long while, felt motivated to tidy up the place. He collected the empty bottles, piled up the dirty clothes, and washed the dishes. As he worked, he thought about the change he wanted to see in his life and the opportunity George had given him. That night, he went to bed with a sense of purpose, something he hadn't felt in years. The next morning, Edward woke up early, cleaned himself up, and dressed in the best clothes he had. He walked to the pizzeria with determination. When he arrived, George was already there, preparing the dough for the day. He gave Edward a warm smile and taught him the basic tasks, starting with cleaning and maintaining the restaurant. As he worked, Edward noticed how the regular customers greeted George with respect and affection. It was clear that George was more than just a pizzeria owner. He was a father figure to many in the community. Edward felt a deep admiration and gratitude toward him, knowing that this was his chance to redeem himself and start anew. The day passed quickly, and although he was exhausted, Edward felt satisfied with his work. Before leaving, George stopped him and handed him an envelope. "It's your first pay. I know it's not much, but it's a start." Edward took it gratefully. "Thank you, George. I promise I won't let you down." "I know, Edward. We all make mistakes. But the important thing is to learn from them and move forward. You have a chance to do that here." Edward left the pizzeria with renewed hope in his heart. As he walked back to his apartment, he thought about the future he could build, one based on honest work and genuine connections. He knew the road wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face it, one day at a time. Edward had spent the past few weeks adjusting to his new job at George's Pizzeria. Although it was a humble environment compared to the luxurious life he used to lead, he began to find comfort in the routine and simplicity of the work. However, the reality of his situation soon hit him hard. One afternoon, while cleaning the tables after lunch, he received a phone call from his mother, Ashley. He hesitated before answering, knowing that conversations with her were always tense. Finally, he decided to pick up. "Edward, we need to talk," Ashley said, her voice stern. "Your father and I have decided to cut off all your financial support. We can't continue to support your irresponsible lifestyle." Edward felt a knot in his stomach. He knew this day would come sooner or later, but he wasn't prepared to face reality. "Mom, I'm trying to change. I found a job, and I'm starting over." "That's good. But you need to learn to be responsible for yourself. You're not a child anymore, Edward. It's time for you to grow up and face the consequences of your actions." The call ended abruptly, leaving him with a mix of despair and determination. That night, as he walked back to his apartment, he realized he didn't have enough money to pay the rent for the month. He knew he had to find a quick solution, or end up on the streets. Edward spent the following weeks trying to balance his job at the pizzeria with finding a solution to his financial crisis. His emotional state was unstable, and the pressure began to take a toll on him physically. He barely slept, and his health deteriorated. George, noticing his distress, decided to step in. One afternoon, after closing the pizzeria, George invited Edward to sit with him. "Edward, I've noticed something's bothering you. What's going on?" Edward hesitated before speaking, but finally decided to be honest. "My parents have stopped supporting me financially. I don't have enough money to pay rent, and I don't know what to do." George looked at him with compassion. "You know, we all face challenges in life. What's important is how we handle them. If you need a place to stay, there's an empty room in the back of the pizzeria. It's not much, but it's better than being on the street." Edward felt an immense sense of relief. "I don't know how to thank you, George. This means a lot to me." "You don't have to thank me. Just make sure you keep working hard and learning from your mistakes. Everyone deserves a second chance." Edward moved into the small room behind the pizzeria. It was nothing more than a simple space with a bed, a table, and a chair. But for him, it was a refuge. George's help not only provided him with a roof over his head, but also gave him a new motivation to keep going. Over time, Edward began to adapt to his new life. He learned to manage his finances carefully and focused on improving his work. His relationship with George grew stronger, and little by little, Edward began to feel like he was regaining control of his life. However, he still carried the weight of his past. The nightmares persisted, and although he found comfort in his work and George's kindness, he knew he had a long way to go before he could fully redeem himself. As time went on, he realized that the key to overcoming his past lay not just in hard work, but also in facing and accepting his mistakes. One night, after a long day, Edward sat in his small room and reflected on his life. He had lost much, but he had also gained something invaluable, a chance to start over. With renewed determination, he decided he would do everything in his power to prove to George and to himself that he was capable of changing and building a dignified and meaningful life. Edward knew the road ahead would be tough, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face it with courage and hope. Edward woke up early, even before the sun had risen. The small room behind the pizzeria, although modest, offered him a sense of security and stability that he hadn't felt in years. He quickly washed up, dressed in his work uniform, and headed to the kitchen. George was already there, kneading the dough for the day's pizzas. "Good morning, Edward," George greeted him with a warm smile. "I hope you slept well." "Good morning, George. Yes, I slept very well. Thank you again for everything you've done for me." George nodded, gesturing to the work table. "Come on, we've got a lot to do today. I'll show you how to prepare the dough properly. It's the foundation of every good pizza." Edward got to work, carefully following George's instructions. He learned to mix the ingredients, knead the dough until it had the perfect texture, and let it rest for the necessary time. Though the work was physical and demanding, Edward began to find pleasure in the simplicity and routine of the process. As the weeks passed, Edward took on more responsibilities at the pizzeria. In addition to preparing the dough, he began learning how to make the sauces, chop the fresh ingredients, and bake the pizzas. He also helped with cleaning and maintaining the place, ensuring that everything was in order for the customers. Regular customers started to notice his presence, and some even offered words of encouragement. "You're doing a great job, young man," Robert, an elderly regular, once told him. "Keep it up, and you'll see how things get better." The support from the community and George helped Edward regain some of the confidence he had lost. He started to feel like he was part of something bigger, a place where he could make a difference, however small. George, always patient and willing to teach, became a father figure to Edward, giving him the kind of guidance and support he had needed for so long. One afternoon, while cleaning the tables after lunch, Edward watched George interact with the customers. It was clear that George didn't just run the pizzeria. He was an integral part of the community. He knew everyone by name, was familiar with their stories, and was always ready to offer a kind word or a smile. Edward realized how much he wanted to be like George. He wanted to be someone others could rely on, someone who made a positive difference in people's lives. This realization gave him a new perspective on his own journey of redemption. One night, After closing the pizzeria, George invited Edward to sit with him at one of the tables. "Edward, you've been doing an incredible job. I'm very proud of your progress." "Thank you, George. I don't know what I would have done without your help." George smiled and patted him on the shoulder. "We all need help at some point in our lives. What matters is what we do with that help, and you're doing a great job. I want you to know that you'll always have a place here, not just as an employee, but as part of this family." Edward felt a lump in his throat, but this time it wasn't from anguish. It was from gratitude. "I promise I won't let you down, George. I'll do everything I can to keep improving and be someone you can be proud of." With each passing day, Edward felt more rooted in his new life. He found satisfaction in honest work and the genuine relationships he was building. Although he still carried the weight of his past, he was beginning to see a brighter future, one where he could redeem himself and find the peace he longed for. Edward knew the path was still long and full of challenges, but with the support of George and the community, he felt ready to face it. This new chapter in his life not only offered him a chance for redemption, but also the opportunity to become the best version of himself. Edward was in the pizzeria early in the morning, preparing the ingredients for the day. The work routine had become an anchor for him, something that gave him stability and purpose. As he chopped tomatoes and prepared the sauce, George entered the kitchen with a young woman by his side. "Edward, I want to introduce you to someone," George said with a smile. "This is Amber. She's going to be joining us at the pizzeria." Amber was a young woman with dark brown hair and bright eyes, radiating a mix of shyness and determination. She wore a new apron and had a nervous expression on her face. Edward offered her a warm smile and extended his hand. "Hello, Amber. Welcome. I'm Edward." "Hi, Edward. Thank you," she replied, shaking his hand firmly. George turned to both of them. "Edward, could you show Amber around the kitchen and teach her some of the basic tasks? I want her to feel comfortable here." "Of course," Edward nodded. "Come on, Amber. I'll show you how we prepare everything." As Edward taught Amber how to prepare the dough, chop the ingredients, and keep the kitchen organized, small conversations began to emerge. Amber was reserved, but whenever she spoke, she revealed a sharp intelligence and sensitivity that intrigued Edward. They realized they both shared a history of struggle and a desire for redemption, though the details of their pasts remained largely hidden. "How did you end up here?" Edward asked one day as they worked together on pizza preparations. Amber paused for a moment, thoughtful. "I was looking for a job, and someone recommended George's pizzeria. I need the money to help my father. He's sick." Edward nodded, feeling a growing connection with her. "I understand. We all have our reasons for being here. But it's a good place. George is a great man." Amber smiled slightly. "Yes, I've noticed. Everyone here seems to care about each other. It's something you don't find in many places." As the weeks went by, the relationship between Edward and Amber grew stronger. They worked together in the kitchen, shared stories and laughter, and gradually, Edward began to notice something more than just friendship. Amber was not only hardworking and efficient, but also possessed a kindness and inner strength that he found irresistible. However, there was still an invisible barrier between them. Amber had her secrets, and Edward, aware of his own troubled past, didn't want to pressure her. He knew that, like him, she needed time to open up and trust. One day, while they were cleaning up after closing, George called them both into the office. "I want to thank you both for your hard work. The pizzeria has been thriving thanks to your dedication." Edward and Amber exchanged a look of satisfaction and gratitude. They felt they were part of something important, something that went beyond just earning money. "There's something else," George continued. "I've been thinking about expanding the business, maybe opening another location in the city. But for that, I'll need someone I trust to manage this pizzeria while I'm away. Edward, Amber, would you be interested in taking on more responsibilities?" Edward felt a whirlwind of emotions. George's trust meant a lot to him, and the idea of taking on a bigger role at the pizzeria filled him with both pride and fear. Amber, on her part, also seemed surprised, but excited. "Of course, George," Edward replied with determination. "We'll do our best." Amber nodded, adding, "We're ready for the challenge. Thank you for trusting us." With this new responsibility, Edward and Amber began working even more closely, learning the complex aspects of the business. The pressure was high, but so was the satisfaction of seeing the fruits of their labor. Through these shared experiences, the relationship between Edward and Amber deepened. Although both were still struggling with their own inner demons, they found comfort and strength in their growing connection. They knew that the path to redemption was long and difficult, but at least now, they weren't walking it alone. Time flew by at the pizzeria, and the working relationship between Edward and Amber grew stronger. The pizzeria thrived, and George was proud of his 2 young employees. However, not everything was as perfect as it seemed. One afternoon, while George was closing the cash register and reviewing the day's accounts, he noticed something odd. A significant amount of money was missing. It wasn't the first time this had happened, and a sense of unease washed over him. He decided not to mention anything at the moment, but knew he needed to investigate further. That night, after closing the pizzeria, George reviewed the security camera footage. He was stunned to see Amber, an employee he held in high regard, taking money from the cash register and hiding it under her shirt. The disappointment and confusion overwhelmed him. Amber had always been a dedicated worker and seemed to have good values. Why would she do something like this? The next day, George decided to confront Amber. He wanted to give her the opportunity to explain what he had seen before making any decisions. He waited until the end of the day, when the pizzeria was closed and only Edward and Amber remained. "Amber, Edward, I need to speak with you in the office," George said seriously, trying to stay calm. Amber and Edward exchanged worried looks before following George to the small office at the back of the pizzeria. Once inside, George closed the door and turned to Amber. "I've been reviewing the accounts and the security cameras," George began, his voice firm but sad. "And I've seen something that deeply concerns me. Amber, I need you to be honest with me. Have you been taking money from the register?" Amber turned pale, and her eyes filled with tears. Her reaction was immediate, but it wasn't one of denial. It was of desperation. "George, please, let me explain. It's not what you think." "Show me what you have under your shirt," George ordered, his voice slightly trembling. Amber, upset and reluctant, crossed her arms defensively. "You can't ask me to do that," she protested. "I said, lift your shirt," he insisted, his gaze serious. Finally, with a resigned sigh, Amber slowly lifted her shirt, revealing the hidden bills and something else. Ugly, deep scars on her abdomen. At that moment, Edward saw the scars and froze. "How did you get those scars?" Edward asked, shocked and distressed. Amber lowered her head and began to recount the traumatic event from 7 years ago. "It was an accident. A truck crashed and left me with these marks. Since then, my father has been sick, and I have no money for his medicine," she explained, with a trembling voice. Edward felt a lump in his throat. as he realized he was the one who had caused that accident. The guilt overwhelmed him, but he remained silent. George, seeing the desperation in Amber's eyes, made a decision. "Amber," he said softly, "you shouldn't steal. If you need help, you must ask for it. Here, in this pizzeria, we're a family, and we support each other." He handed her the missing money from the register. "Here's the money for your father's medicine, but please, don't do this again. Trust us." Amber, with tears in her eyes, accepted the money and nodded gratefully. "I'm so sorry, George. I didn't know who else to turn to." Edward, feeling overwhelmed by guilt and the need to do the right thing, decided he had to talk to Amber about the accident. But he knew it wasn't the right time. He needed time to find the right words and to confront his own fear. That night, as he returned to his small room behind the pizzeria, Edward couldn't stop thinking about Amber and the scars she bore, both physical and emotional. He knew he had to talk to her, to confess his role in the accident and face the consequences. But first, he needed to understand better what she had gone through. The next day, during a break at work, Edward found the courage to approach Amber. He found her at the back of the pizzeria, sitting on a bench, staring into the distance. He took a deep breath and sat beside her. "Amber, can we talk?" he asked gently. Amber looked at him, her eyes still reflecting sadness and mistrust. But she nodded. "Sure, Edward. What's going on?" Edward swallowed hard, searching for the right words. "I want to know more about what happened with the accident. I feel like I need to understand." Amber lowered her gaze, her fingers nervously playing with the edge of her apron. "It's not something I like to remember, but I guess talking about it might help." Edward nodded, encouraging her to continue. "It was 7 years ago," Amber began, her voice trembling. "We were on our way home, my father, my little sister and I, after spending the day at the lake. It was a quiet afternoon. We were happy. But then a sports car, a BMW, appeared out of nowhere, trying to overtake us. The driver was drunk, lost control, and forced us off the road. The truck crashed into a tree and caught fire." Edward felt a knot in his stomach as he listened. Amber's words, like knives stabbing his heart. "I managed to get out of the car, but my father and sister were trapped. I tried to help them, but the fire, I couldn't do anything." Amber paused, her voice breaking as tears began to roll down her cheeks. "My father suffered severe burns and has been sick ever since. My sister, she didn't survive." Edward wanted to comfort her, but he felt paralyzed by guilt. Amber continued, her voice filled with hatred and pain. "Since that day, I've lived with these scars, both on my body and in my soul. And the worst part is knowing that the person responsible for all this, that damn driver of the BMW, fled the scene. He never paid for what he did. I've always hated that person, without even knowing who they were." Edward felt the world closing in on him. Amber's confession, her pain, her hatred, all hit him like an unrelenting storm. He knew he had to tell the truth, but the words were stuck in his throat. "Amber," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "I have something to tell you. Something you need to know." Amber looked at him, her eyes still wet with tears. "What is it, Edward?" Edward took a deep breath, feeling like he was about to jump into the void. I was the driver of that BMW. It was me who caused the accident." The silence that followed was deafening. Amber stared at him, her face shifting from surprise to disbelief, and then to pure horror. She jumped to her feet, backing away from him. "What? Are you telling me that you're the one who ruined my life? You're responsible for my sister's death?" she screamed, her voice filled with fury and pain. Edward stood up, trying to approach her, but Amber stepped back, raising a hand to stop him. "Don't come any closer. I can't believe this. All this time, you've been here, working with me, knowing what you did." "Amber, I'm sorry," Edward said, his voice breaking. "There are no words that can undo the damage I've done. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make amends. Please, let me help you." Amber looked at him with tear-filled eyes, her body trembling. I can't even look at you right now. I need time. I need to think." Without waiting for a response, Amber turned and ran, leaving Edward alone, overwhelmed by a storm of guilt and despair. He knew the path to redemption would be long and painful, but he was determined to walk it, no matter how difficult it would be. Edward spent the night wide awake, replaying the heart-wrenching conversation with Amber in his mind. Guilt and pain consumed him, but he knew he had taken the first step towards redemption. The next morning, he arrived at the pizzeria with a heavy heart, unsure if Amber would show up for work. To his relief, Amber arrived shortly after opening, although she avoided meeting his gaze. The tension in the air was palpable, but they both threw themselves into their tasks, trying to maintain professionalism. George, noticing the coldness between them, decided to give them space, hoping they would resolve their differences. At the end of the day, George called them into his office. "I know something serious is going on between you two," he said in a calm yet firm voice. "If we want to continue as a team, we need to sort this out. Amber, Edward, what's going on?" Amber looked at George, then at Edward, and finally decided to speak. "George, Edward confessed something to me yesterday. Something that changed everything." Edward nodded, taking a deep breath. "George, years ago, I caused an accident. It was the same accident that involved Amber and her family. I was the driver of the BMW that caused it all." George remained silent for a moment, processing the information. Finally, he spoke calmly. "This is very serious, but it's also important that we discuss how we can move forward from here." Amber took the lead, her voice shaky but firm. "Since that accident, I've lived with hatred towards the driver. Knowing it was Edward, it has shattered me. But I also understand that everyone makes mistakes, and living with hatred won't help me heal." Edward looked at her with a mix of gratitude and sadness. "Amber, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make amends for what I did. I want to help you and support your family. Just give me a chance to prove it." Amber sighed, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's not something I can easily forgive, Edward, but I'm willing to try working with you, as long as you're honest and do everything you can to make it right." Sensing a glimmer of hope, George intervened. "Very well. What matters now is how we handle this situation. Edward, Amber, I suggest you take some time to talk and understand each other better. The pizzeria can wait." Amber nodded, and Edward did the same. They decided to go to a nearby park to have a longer and deeper conversation. Sitting on a bench in the park, Amber looked at Edward with a mix of pain and determination. "I want to know everything, Edward. I want to understand why you did what you did and how you've gotten to this point." Edward nodded, ready to open his heart. "Years ago, I was living a life of excess. I had no responsibilities and relied entirely on my family's money. That night, I was drunk and didn't think about the consequences of my actions. After the accident, I was consumed by guilt, but I lacked the courage to face my mistakes. It was George and this pizzeria that helped me find a new path." Amber listened intently, her expression softening slightly. "I understand that everyone makes mistakes, Edward, but what hurts me is that your mistake destroyed my life and my family's. My sister died. My father never recovered. We've lived in misery since then." Edward felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Amber, I am deeply sorry. There's no excuse for what I did. But I'm here now, willing to do whatever it takes to help you. If you give me a chance, I want to redeem myself and show you that I've changed." Amber nodded slowly, feeling a glimmer of hope. "All right, Edward. I'll give you that chance. But you must understand that it will take time and a lot of effort. It won't be easy for either of us." Edward nodded with determination. "I know, Amber. I'm willing to do whatever is necessary." With a fragile yet firm understanding, they returned to the pizzeria, knowing that the road to redemption and forgiveness would be long and arduous. But at least now, they would walk it together. Edward and Amber returned to the pizzeria with a new determination. Although the wound was still fresh, and the path to forgiveness had only just begun, both knew they had to keep moving forward. Work at the pizzeria continued, and with each passing day, Edward worked hard to prove that he had truly changed. Edward knew he needed to take the next step in his redemption, reconnecting with his father, Arthur. The relationship with his family had been strained since the accident, and Edward's subsequent descent into substance abuse. He decided it was time to face his past and seek his father's support. One afternoon, after closing the pizzeria, Edward called his father. The phone rang several times before Arthur answered. "Edward, what do you want?" His father's voice was cold, full of disappointment. "Dad, I need to talk to you. I know I've made many mistakes, but I'm trying to change. I'm working hard, and I want to make things right. I need your help," Edward said, trying to stay calm. There was a long silence before Arthur responded. "All right, Edward. Come see me tomorrow. We'll talk." The next day, Edward headed to his parents' house. The drive there was filled with memories of his past life, but also with a growing sense of determination. He knew this conversation would be crucial to his redemption. Arthur received him in his study, a place filled with reminders of his business success. Edward sat across from his father, feeling the tension in the air. "Edward, what do you want to tell me?" Arthur asked, crossing his arms. "Dad, I know I've been a huge disappointment to you and Mom. I made terrible mistakes, especially with the accident, but I'm working at George's Pizzeria, and I've found a reason to change. I want to make things right, not just for myself, but also for the people I've hurt. I need your support to keep moving forward," Edward said sincerely. Arthur stared at him for a moment before sighing. "Edward, I've always wanted the best for you, but you have to want it too. If you're truly willing to change, I'll support you. But you have to prove it." Edward nodded. "Thank you, Dad. I won't let you down." With his father's support, Edward was able to secure the necessary funds to help George's Pizzeria and assist Amber's family. This support was crucial, not only for Edward's stability, but also for the health of Amber's father, who needed urgent medical treatment. Returning to the pizzeria, Edward met with Amber and George. "I talked to my father. He's going to help us with the funds for the pizzeria and for your father's treatment, Amber." Amber looked at him with a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Edward, this is incredible. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me, Amber. This is the least I can do. It's my way of starting to make up for my mistakes," Edward said sincerely. The relationship between Edward and Amber began to strengthen. They worked together at the pizzeria, sharing not only the workload, but also their stories and dreams. The nights were long, but filled with conversation and mutual support. Edward realized he was falling in love with Amber, not just because of her beauty, but because of her strength and kindness. One day, while they were closing up the pizzeria, Edward decided to open his heart. "Amber, I know it's still hard for you to trust me, but I want you to know that I care about you a lot. I've fallen in love with you, and I'll do everything I can to show you that I'm worthy of your trust and love." Amber looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "Edward, I also feel something for you, but we need time. Time to heal and build something solid. I'm willing to try, but step by step." Edward nodded with a hopeful smile. "Of course, Amber, step by step. I'm here for whatever you need." As days turned into weeks, the pizzeria thrived under the joint management of Edward and Amber. Arthur's support allowed for improvements in the facilities and more offerings to the community. Amber's father's health improved with proper treatment, and the family began to see a brighter future. Edward evolved from a young man who was arrogant and reliant on his family's money to a responsible and humble individual. He found satisfaction in honest work and genuine relationships, leaving behind his life of excess. Amber, in turn, also found support and companionship in Edward to overcome her traumas. With Arthur's support and the progress at the pizzeria, Edward and Amber's lives began to stabilize. Although the wounds of the past were still present, they found comfort and strength in their growing connection. The pizzeria became more organized and efficient, and the relationships among the employees grew stronger. One morning, George called a meeting before opening the pizzeria. "I want to thank you all for your hard work and dedication. The pizzeria is thriving thanks to your efforts. But I also want to remind you that this isn't just a business. It's a family. We support each other through good times and bad." Edward and Amber looked at each other and nodded, feeling the weight of those words. They knew that while they had come a long way, there was still much to do to heal completely. In the following weeks, Edward and Amber focused on further improving the pizzeria. They implemented new ideas to attract more customers, such as themed nights and special promotions. They also became more involved in the community, participating in local events and donating to charities. One afternoon, after a particularly busy day, Edward and Amber decided to take a walk in the nearby park. It was a moment to relax and enjoy each other's company outside of the work environment. "You know, Edward," Amber said as they walked, "I never imagined I would find peace and happiness in a place like this, after everything that happened." Edward looked at her with a gentle smile. "I feel the same. Finding this pizzeria, George, and especially you, has given me a reason to change and be better." Amber stopped and looked him in the eyes. "Thank you for everything you've done for my family and me. I know it's still hard sometimes, but I'm starting to trust you, and that means a lot to me." Edward felt a surge of emotions. "Amber, I'll do everything I can to earn your trust every day, no matter what the future holds." Amber smiled and took his hand. "I'm willing to try, Edward, step by step, as we said." As they walked back, Edward felt a renewed determination. He knew he had to keep striving, not just for Amber, but for himself as well. The simple yet meaningful life he was building gave him a sense of purpose he had never felt before. The relationship between Edward and Amber continued to strengthen. They shared not only the work, but also their dreams and aspirations. They began to plan their future together, imagining how they could grow the pizzeria and help the community even more. One night, as they were closing the pizzeria, Edward realized how much he had changed. He felt a deep satisfaction in honest work and the genuine relationships he was building. He knew he still had a lot to prove, but he was willing to face it with courage and dedication. Edward and Amber also began to engage in community projects. They organized a food drive for needy families and started offering free cooking classes on weekends. These activities not only strengthened their bond with the community, but also gave them a greater sense of purpose. During one of these cooking classes, Amber watched Edward interact with the neighborhood children, teaching them how to make pizza. His patience and kindness deeply moved her. It was a constant reminder of how much he had changed and how much he had grown since that fateful accident. At the end of the class, while they were cleaning up together, Amber turned to Edward. "You're doing a great job with the kids. I can see how much they care about you." Edward smiled, feeling warmth in his heart. "Thank you, Amber. I never thought something like this could make me feel so fulfilled. But here, with you and this community, I feel like I'm finally doing something meaningful." Amber looked at him tenderly. "Edward, I think we've both found something special here. And even though the path has been difficult, I'm grateful for every step we've taken together." As the pizzeria prospered and their relationship strengthened, Edward and Amber began to plan their future together more concretely. They talked about opening a new branch, expanding their community projects, and eventually starting a family. Over time, Edward realized that his life had changed radically. He was no longer the irresponsible young man who relied on his family's money. He had found a new identity in honest work, love, and serving others. Even though the pizzeria was thriving and Edward and Amber's relationship was growing stronger, the ghosts of the past still lingered. They both knew that life would not give them an easy reprieve and that each day would bring new challenges. One afternoon, while Amber was preparing ingredients in the kitchen, she received an urgent phone call from her mother. Amber's father had had a relapse and was in the hospital. The news hit Amber like a bucket of cold water, and she could barely hold back her tears. "Edward, I have to go. My father is in the hospital," she said, her voice trembling. Edward stopped what he was doing and approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Amber, don't worry about anything here. Go to your father. I'll take care of the pizzeria." Amber nodded, grateful, and ran off to the hospital. Edward, though worried about her, focused on keeping the business running. That night, the pizzeria was busier than usual, and Edward had to take on multiple roles to cover Amber's absence. After closing, Edward sat in the office, exhausted but satisfied with how he had managed the day. However, his mind kept wandering to Amber and her father. He decided to call her to check how things were going. "Amber, how is your father?" Edward asked with concern. "He's stable now, but the doctors say he needs more intensive treatment." "It's exhausting, Edward, but thank you for handling everything today," Amber replied, her voice heavy with fatigue. "You're strong, Amber. You'll get through this. And remember, I'm here to help with anything you need," Edward said gently. The next day, Amber returned to the pizzeria with swollen eyes from crying, but with renewed determination. Despite the pain, she knew she had to keep going. Edward greeted her with a warm hug. "Thank you for everything, Edward. Really, I don't know how I would have managed this without you," Amber said gratefully. "We're a team, Amber. We're in this together," Edward replied, with an encouraging smile. As days went by, Edward faced temptations from his old life of excess. Old friends began to show up, inviting him to parties and to relive days of indulgence. One night, he received a message from one of those friends, inviting him to a party at an exclusive club. Edward looked at the message, feeling a mix of nostalgia and temptation. He knew that attending this party could mean a setback in all the progress he had made. He decided to talk to George about it. "George, I've been getting invitations from old friends. They're tempting me to return to my old life," Edward confessed. George looked at him with understanding. "Edward, there will always be temptations in life. The important thing is to remember why you chose to change and who you are now. You've made great progress. Don't let past mistakes define you." Edward nodded, feeling a renewed determination. He knew he needed to stay strong and remember why he decided to change. That night, instead of going to the party, he chose to stay at the pizzeria and work on new projects for the business. Amber also faced her own challenges. Her father's illness and the responsibilities of caring for him were overwhelming. At times, she felt like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. But Edward's constant presence and support gave her the strength to keep going. One afternoon, as they worked together in the kitchen, Amber looked at Edward and said, "Thank you for being here for me, Edward. I don't know how you do it, but you always know how to lift my spirits." Edward smiled. "I just try to be the friend and partner you need. And I admire you so much, Amber. You're incredibly strong." Over time, they both found ways to balance their responsibilities and take care of themselves. They decided to implement rest days where they could relax and recharge. These small breaks became precious moments where they could enjoy each other's company and plan their future together. Edward and Amber learned to face their challenges with courage and support each other every step of the way. Although the path to redemption and inner peace was difficult, they both knew they were on the right track. Together, they could overcome any obstacle and build a life filled with love, purpose, and hope. As time went by, the pizzeria solidified as an important pillar in the community. With Amber and George's support, Edward became a respected and admired figure for his dedication and effort. Challenges didn't cease, but each day he felt stronger and more capable of facing them. One morning, Edward received an unexpected call. It was his father, Arthur, who had been observing his progress from afar. "Edward, I've noticed how much you've changed and grown. I'd like you to come to the office today. There's something I want to discuss with you," Arthur said in a warmer tone than usual. Surprised but excited, Edward accepted the invitation. After finishing his shift at the pizzeria, he headed to his father's office. Upon arrival, he was welcomed by Arthur in his spacious office. "Edward, I'm proud of you. You've shown that you can change and take on responsibilities. That's why I want to offer you an opportunity," Arthur said, pointing to a set of documents on his desk. "I want you to be part of the family business again, but this time in a role where you can apply everything you've learned." Edward looked at the documents, feeling a mix of pride and doubt. "Dad, I don't know if I'm ready for this. The pizzeria and the community have taught me a lot, but the company is a different world." Arthur nodded. "I know, son, but I believe in you, and you can continue helping at the pizzeria while working with us. In fact, we could collaborate on projects that benefit both sides." Edward took a moment to consider the offer. He knew this was a unique opportunity to prove his worth not only to his father, but also to himself. However, he also knew how much the pizzeria meant to him and how it had been crucial in his redemption process. "Dad," Edward began carefully, "I really appreciate this opportunity and your trust in me. But I've found something in the pizzeria that I can't leave behind. It has taught me the value of honest work, the importance of human connections, and how to confront my mistakes. I can't abandon it now." Arthur looked at him, surprised but understanding the depth of his words. "I understand, Edward. It's important to follow what gives you purpose. I'm proud of you for making this decision. Thank you, Dad. I want to continue helping at the pizzeria and in the community. I want to be part of something that makes a direct difference in people's lives, Edward said with conviction. Arthur nodded with a proud smile. Then follow your path, son, and if you ever need anything, you know I'm always here to support you. Edward said goodbye to his father with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew he had made the right decision. Upon returning to the pizzeria, he felt more committed than ever to his work and the people around him. Amber greeted him with a warm smile as he walked through the door. "How did it go with your father?" "Good," Edward replied. "He offered me a position at the company, but I declined. I realized that the pizzeria is where I truly belong. Here is where I can make a real difference." Amber looked at him with admiration. "I'm proud of you, Edward. You've changed so much and found your true purpose." Edward took her hand. "I've found my true purpose alongside you." Amber looked at him, and together they shared an intimate moment that strengthened their bond. One day, as they walked through the park, Edward took Amber's hand and looked into her eyes. "Amber, I've learned so much from you and with you. You've been my anchor and my inspiration. I want you to know that I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you," he said sincerely. Amber, with tears of happiness in her eyes, smiled and replied, "Edward, I love you too. We've been through so much together, and I know we can face anything. I want to build that future with you." With their love and mutual commitment reaffirmed, Edward and Amber began to plan their future together with even more enthusiasm. They knew that the road wouldn't always be easy, but they were ready to face it, supporting each other every step of the way. Over time, Amber's father's health began to improve, thanks to the appropriate treatment. However, the medical bills were piling up, and the financial pressure was mounting. Edward knew he needed to do something to help even more. One night, after closing the pizzeria, Edward decided to talk to George about the situation. "George, I know we've been doing great work here, but I need to ask you a favor. Amber's family is going through a tough time, and I'd like to organize a charity event to raise funds." George, always understanding and willing to help, nodded. "Of course, Edward. I think it's a great idea. We can organize a special night at the pizzeria with live music and donations. I'm sure the community will want to support." With George's support, Edward began planning the event. He worked tirelessly to ensure its success, contacting local musicians, preparing promotions, and spreading the word throughout the community. On the day of the event, the pizzeria was lively and bustling. Customers came in droves, eager to support the cause. There was music, delicious food, and a sense of solidarity that touched everyone. Amber, who had been informed about the event, arrived at the end of the night, surprised and moved by the gesture. "Edward, this is amazing. I don't know how to thank you," Amber said, tears in her eyes. Edward hugged her. "You don't need to thank me, Amber. Everyone here wanted to help. We're a family, and we support each other." The charity event was a great success, raising enough funds to cover the medical bills and ensure Amber's father's ongoing treatment. The community once again showed its unity and unconditional support. In time, Amber returned to work at the pizzeria, feeling more grateful and connected to the community than ever. Her relationship with Edward grew even stronger, cemented in the love and solidarity they had shared. One day, as they were closing the pizzeria together, Edward took Amber's hand. "Amber, we've been through so much together, and each challenge has made us stronger. I want you to know that I'm here for you, in good times and bad." Amber smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Edward, you are my anchor. Thank you for always being by my side. I couldn't have done it without you." Life at the pizzeria continued with a steady rhythm, but the bond between Edward and Amber had deepened significantly. Every day they shared more than just work. They shared dreams, fears, and hopes. It was clear to both that their relationship was blossoming into something much more meaningful. One day, after closing the pizzeria, Edward decided it was time to fully open his heart. They had faced so many challenges together, and he felt he needed to be honest about his feelings. He prepared a special dinner at the pizzeria, decorating a table with candles and flowers. Amber arrived at the pizzeria after visiting her father in the hospital. Upon entering, she was surprised to see the decorated table and Edward waiting for her with a nervous smile. "Edward, what is all this?" Amber asked, with a mix of curiosity and excitement. "I wanted to do something special for you," Edward replied, guiding her to the table. "We've been through so much together, and I wanted you to know how much you mean to me." They sat down and enjoyed the dinner, talking and laughing as always, but there was a palpable tension in the air, a sense that something important was about to be said. Finally, Edward took a deep breath and looked into Amber's eyes. "Amber, there's something I want to tell you," Edward began, feeling his heart race. "Since I met you, you've been a light in my life. You've taught me to be better, to face my mistakes, and to find a purpose. Every day I spend with you, I realize how much I love you." Amber looked at him, her eyes filled with tears of joy. "Edward, I love you too. You've been my rock and my support in the darkest times. I don't know what I'd do without you." Edward took her hand and continued, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Amber. I want to build a future together, full of love and hope. Will you marry me?" Amber was speechless for a moment, but then nodded with a broad smile. "Yes, Edward, I will marry you. I want to share my life with you, through the good times and the bad." They embraced, feeling that they had found in each other a home, a place where they could be themselves and be loved unconditionally. The promise of a future together gave them a new perspective and renewed strength to face any challenge. With their engagement sealed, they began planning their future together with even more enthusiasm. They talked about their dreams, how to expand the pizzeria, and how to continue helping the community. They wanted their love and work to be an inspiration to others, showing that change and redemption are possible. News of their engagement spread quickly through the community. Regular customers, friends, and family congratulated them and offered their support. George, in particular, was excited about the news. "I'm so happy for you both," George said, hugging them both. "You've worked hard and supported each other at every turn. You deserve all the happiness in the world." With the community's support and their mutual love, Edward and Amber embarked on the next phase of their life together. They continued working at the pizzeria, expanding their reach and strengthening their impact on the community. They organized more charity events, cooking classes, and support programs for young people, using their story as an example of overcoming and hope. Every day, Edward woke up with a renewed determination and gratitude. He had found not only love, but also a purpose that gave meaning to his life. With Amber by his side, he knew he could face any obstacle and build a life full of meaning and happiness. Edward's evolution from an irresponsible and dependent young man to a responsible and committed individual was a testament to the power of love, honest work, and the desire for redemption. With Amber by his side, he was ready to face any challenge and build a future filled with purpose, love, and hope. As the wedding plans progressed, Edward couldn't shake the growing need to speak with Amber's father. He knew that before getting married, he needed to confront his past and seek the approval of the man whose life he had impacted so deeply. It was a crucial step to heal wounds and build a sincere and solid future with Amber. One afternoon, Edward gathered his courage and decided to visit Amber's father in the hospital. Amber accompanied him, providing moral support. But she knew this was a conversation Edward needed to have alone. Upon arrival, Amber left him at the door of her father's room with an encouraging look. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, before giving him a gentle handshake. Edward nodded, took a deep breath, and entered the room. Amber's father, a man with a stern and tired expression, was lying in bed with tubes and machines monitoring his condition. Upon seeing Edward, his expression hardened further. "Sir," Edward began, his voice trembling, "thank you for seeing me. There's something I need to say, something I should have said a long time ago." Amber's father stared at him intently, saying nothing, waiting. Edward continued, feeling the weight of his words. "Many years ago, I was responsible for the accident that caused so much pain to your family. I was a coward and ran away from my responsibilities. All this time, I have carried the guilt and shame of my actions. There are no words that can repair the damage I caused, but I am here to ask for your forgiveness and to take responsibility for what I should have from the beginning." The silence in the room was overwhelming. Amber's father closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to contain a tide of emotions. When he finally spoke, his voice was laden with pain and resentment. "For years, I have lived with the pain of losing my daughter and seeing my family torn apart," he said, his voice trembling. "I thought I would never find the person responsible for that night. To know that it was you. I don't know if I can forgive you, but I see that you have changed and that you love my daughter." Tears rolled down Edward's cheeks. "I understand, sir. I don't expect your immediate forgiveness. I just want you to know that I will do everything I can to make amends and take care of Amber with all my heart." Amber's father looked at Edward, his gaze softening a bit. "Edward, what you did was unforgivable. But I have seen how you have changed and become a better man. Amber has spoken to me about you and how much you have supported her. If she has found someone she can trust and love in you, then maybe there is hope for forgiveness." Edward nodded, feeling relieved but aware that the path to full forgiveness would be long. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity, sir. I promise I won't let you down." Amber's father sighed deeply. "Take care of my daughter, Edward. She deserves to be happy after everything she has been through." Edward bowed, his eyes filled with tears. "I will, with all my being." As Edward left the room, he found Amber waiting in the hallway. He hugged her tightly, feeling a mix of relief and renewal. "We talked. It wasn't easy, but I think we made an important step." Amber looked at him with pride and love. "I knew you would handle it well. Thank you for facing it. This means a lot to me." With the father's blessing, though still reserved, Edward and Amber continued with the wedding plans. However, Edward knew his redemption did not end there. He needed to demonstrate his commitment and love every day, both towards Amber and her family. The conversation with Amber's father had been a confrontation with his past, but also a liberation. It had allowed him to face one of the darkest chapters of his life and come out stronger. Although the wounds were still fresh, Edward and Amber's love and commitment were stronger. As they moved towards the future, both knew they could overcome any obstacle together. With each challenge they faced, Their relationship grew stronger, grounded in truth, redemption, and unconditional love. The conversation with Amber's father was a crucial point in Edward's life. Although he knew full forgiveness would take time, he felt he had made a significant step towards redemption. With the wedding approaching, Edward and Amber focused on preparations, but Edward knew he had another issue to address: strengthening his relationship with his own father, Arthur. One morning, Edward decided to visit Arthur at his office. He wanted to share everything he had learned and experienced, and also thank him for the support he had always been willing to offer, even when he didn't deserve it. "Dad, thanks for meeting with me," Edward said as he entered his father's office. Arthur looked at him with a warm smile. "Edward, you always have a place here. What brings you today?" Edward sat down, feeling the weight of the moment. "Dad, I want to talk to you about everything that has happened, about Amber, the pizzeria, and how I have changed. I also want to thank you for your support and for giving me the chance to be better." Arthur nodded, interested. "Of course, son. I'm here to listen." Edward began recounting everything from his work at the pizzeria to the recent conversation with Amber's father. Arthur listened attentively, nodding occasionally, but without interrupting. When Edward finished, he felt a tremendous weight lifted from his shoulders. "Dad, I've learned so much at the pizzeria. The value of honest work, the importance of human connections, and the need to confront my mistakes. I can't leave behind what has made me who I am today. That's why I turned down your offer to return to the company. I want to continue helping the community and working at the pizzeria." Arthur looked at him with pride. "Edward, you've come a long way. I'm proud of the person you've become. I understand why you made that decision, and I respect it. The pizzeria and the community have given you a new perspective, and that is invaluable." Edward smiled, feeling closer to his father than ever. "Thank you, Dad. Your support means a lot to me. I want to continue collaborating with you, but from my place at the pizzeria, helping the community." Arthur nodded. "We can do great things together, son. The company can support the community projects that are important to you. We can work on initiatives that benefit everyone." With a new understanding and a shared purpose, Edward and Arthur began planning projects that would connect the family business with the local community. They decided to organize charity events, support small businesses, and offer training programs for young people. Meanwhile, the preparations for Edward and Amber's wedding continued. The pizzeria became a hub of activity and excitement, with all the employees involved in the planning and decorating. George, always a paternal figure and mentor, was especially excited about the couple's future. One day, while Edward and Amber were working at the pizzeria, Arthur arrived with a proposal. "I've been thinking about how the company can support the pizzeria and the community. How about we fund a community center next to the pizzeria? It could be a place where people can gather, learn new skills, and receive support." Edward and Amber exchanged amazed and grateful looks. "Dad, that would be amazing. A community center could make a huge difference here," Edward said, excited. Amber nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, it would be wonderful. Thank you, Arthur, for thinking of this. We could offer cooking classes, workshops, and many other activities." With everyone's approval, they began planning the construction of the community center. The news spread quickly, and the community responded with overwhelming enthusiasm. The project would not only strengthen the pizzeria but also provide a safe and enriching space for everyone. Edward's relationship with his father grew stronger through this shared project. Arthur, seeing the positive impact his son was having on the community, felt proud and grateful for the path Edward had chosen. As the wedding approached, Edward and Amber felt more connected and supported than ever. They knew that with Arthur and George's help, and with their mutual love and commitment, they could overcome any obstacle and build a future full of hope and purpose. The wedding day arrived, and the pizzeria and community center were decorated with lights and flowers. Family, friends, and community members gathered to celebrate Edward and Amber's union. George officiated the ceremony with words full of love and wisdom. Today we celebrate not only the love between Edward and Amber, but also the strength of redemption, honest work, and commitment to the community, George said. This couple has shown that change is possible and that together we can build a better future. With those words, Edward and Amber exchanged vows full of love and promises of mutual support. The ceremony was a testament to the power of love, redemption, and community. As night fell, Edward and Amber held hands and looked around. They were surrounded by people who loved and supported them, and they knew they had found their place in the world. Together, they could face any challenge and build a life filled with purpose, love, and hope. Edward and Amber's wedding day was a beautiful reminder of the power of love, redemption, and community. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Edward and Amber found a new normal, a shared life full of love, purpose, and commitment. The community center next to the pizzeria became a beacon of hope and support for the community. They offered cooking classes, job skills, workshops, and mentoring programs for young people. Edward and Amber worked tirelessly, seeing how their efforts improved the lives of those around them. One afternoon, while organizing a cooking class for children, Amber stopped and looked at Edward. "Do you remember how it all started?" she asked with a nostalgic smile. Edward nodded, taking her hand. "Yes, I remember. It's incredible to see how much we've grown and changed since then." Amber smiled, her eyes shining with love. "We have faced so many challenges together and emerged stronger. I couldn't have imagined a better future." Over time, Amber's father began to accept Edward as part of the family. Although the pain of the past never completely vanished, Edward's love and commitment demonstrated his true nature and desire for redemption. Their relationship was based on mutual understanding and respect. Seeing the positive impact Edward had on the community and his own life, Arthur felt prouder than ever. The collaboration between the company and the pizzeria flourished, benefiting everyone involved. One day, while walking in the park, Edward and Amber stopped at a bench and reflected on their journey together. "Amber, we have come a long way since those early days at the pizzeria. I have learned so much and found a true purpose. All thanks to you," Edward said with gratitude. "And I have found in you an incredible partner, Edward, someone who supports and loves me unconditionally." "I couldn't have asked for a better life," Amber replied, caressing his face. The story of Edward and Amber teaches us that the past does not define who we are, but rather how we choose to confront our mistakes and grow from them. The path to redemption can be long and difficult, but with love, support, and a sincere commitment to change, it is possible to build a better future. Edward shows us that honest work and genuine relationships can transform even the most lost individuals, giving them purpose and a reason to live. Amber, with her strength and compassion, reminds us of the importance of empathy and forgiveness. In our own lives, we can learn from their example by facing our challenges with courage, seeking forgiveness, and striving to make a positive difference in the world. By doing so, we not only find redemption, but also a deep sense of purpose and love. Thank you for joining us in this incredible story of redemption and love. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to not miss any episodes. See you in the next video. Until then.